Here we go. All right. Welcome, everybody. I think we wrap up the assessment phase this evening. So wow, we made some good progress. Don't need to do a roll call, but I do want to mention again, please let us know if you're going to be here or not. Just helps us plan. So we make sure that if we are voting, we have a quorum. Remind you on that. Did you want to mention anything?
I'll get into it when we talk about the schedule
Okay.
a little bit more, but yeah, we're kind of wrapping up existing conditions tonight, and I'll talk about what the next phase will look like when we get to that item.
So good. Really not moving on acceptance of the agenda. No minutes, as we just met last week. Public comment.
And none online.
Not online. All right, we're gonna keep rolling. Tonight, we are discussing natural and water resources chapter. And we have an esteemed guest with us this evening. Our environmental services manager, Megan Hess, is with us. We'll hear from her in a bit. We're also going to get into ag and forest resources. And then after that, we're going to set dates for the coming phase. So
yeah,
made some good progress so far. Isabel, you're up.
So as with before, I'll just go through and summarize the issues and opportunities. Obviously, with natural and water resources specifically, there is a lot of data in that section. I would encourage you to take a look at it. I will say that I think it was 2011, the forestry and agriculture sort of compendium to the 2014 plan really addressed a lot of previously documented natural resource concerns and in maintaining rural function and rural character of the area. So with that zoning district, at least specifically, a lot of items have sort of been addressed. But what has changed significantly since the 2014 plan and what the town and the region has been working towards is sort of climate adaptation planning. And so that's sort of what I've highlighted in terms of issues and opportunities for this section. And that Megan will get into more if you have any specific questions about what the town has been doing thus far. So that being said, in terms of issues, one of the things that I wanted to sort of highlight is, in general, the term 100-year flood or 100-year storm, at that point, that's kind of a misnomer. It used to be essentially that those storms were occurring at about a 1% chance a year. That is no longer the case in Maine. In general, we're just getting wetter, we're getting more extreme storm events, and each calendar year between 2020 and 2023 ranked among the top 10 warmest years, essentially since 1895. In addition, it was also some of the wettest time period in terms of extreme storm events. The calendar year 2023 ranked the second warmest and the fifth wettest for Maine. So we have more days per year with over an inch of precipitation, storm events with 1 hour intensities, extreme storm events. So that being said, this was something that I actually think that you brought up at the last meeting that I wanted to make sure that we had documented as an issue within the plan. And that's right sizing culverts for future storm events. So as we're all sort of aware across the state, in especially the December storms of last year, there were a number of culvert washouts sort of all over the region, and ensuring that those are the right size to accommodate the huge volume of water that ends up filling these drainage systems during major storm events is an important adaptation measure that communities across the state are now considering. Obviously, when a culvert cannot convey the amount of water attempting to flow through it, the water ends up backing up and causing localized flooding, and the accumulated water might overflow across the roadway, obviously disrupting transportation, increasing erosion, or entirely washing out the culvert. So in general, planning for future storm events and not just basing the sizes of culverts on historical storm data will end up being an important part of how Orono specifically, but really the region and statewide, protects our water resources and our transportation assets into the future. And I had this in the chapter, but this is the information on how our precipitation events have been steadily increasing. So that hashed gray line is the trend line, and it essentially represents increases of about 6 inches across the record period. So much more significant annual precipitation as well. And then sort of related to that, a lot of the town's floodplain, actually the town's floodplain maps are based on FEMA's flood maps, which currently define flood risk based only on past events. And we regulate floodplains and construction in the floodplain based on those maps. So those maps end up using historical storms to calibrate computer models that are used to map flood risk. And they're based on the assumption that the past should inform future decisions. Now, we're generally aware that climate changes make flood disasters more frequent and more severe. So basing decisions on past conditions probably does not take into account climate impacts and other factors that are going on. The town of Orono, the city of Bangor, and the region as a whole collaborated on Penobscot Climate Action. That was completed earlier this year by Bax, who was present at this meeting last week. It ended up recommending that all communities in our region update their floodplain zoning to take into account future climate risk. So since extreme precipitation events are becoming more frequent, Orono might wish to utilize climate modeling in floodplain regulation rather than FEMA's historical data. And just in terms of flood insurance and all of that, Orono originally adopted this our floodplain ordinance to comply with FEMA flood insurance. It essentially provides cheaper rates for those who are in the floodplain. You are allowed to go over and beyond that their sort of minimum level of regulation. So using future modeling rather than historical modeling would likely go above and beyond what they're requiring for compliance with that. In general,
an example, if you are interested, go out the BZ Railroad bed from Forest Avenue towards Bangor City Forest. There were culverts there. Those were removed and a bridge put in. The difference was Stillwater Avenue no longer flooded this year. And it's because the water could move. So it's not always culverts. Sometimes you have to make it even bigger and have a bridge instead of a culvert.
yeah.
Yeah, a lot of
I think
stream
that-
crossings, that's what DEP advocates for now, is removing culverts, and they like open box
Open box
arches,
or a
that
bridge
kind
or
of thing,
whatever, yeah.
and then they make it wide, they want it like, it's called bank full width, they want it wider than typically would flow, just to allow for these extreme events. This is a-
Beavers work harder too to fill it in.
This is a really big deal for this committee to consider, because it's what I do for a living, so I a bit of passion on this end, but I'm a stormwater engineer basically, so I work with this stuff day in, day out, and again, preparing for the types of storms that we are seeing now and we're gonna see in the future is actually just gonna be really important for the town. It's gonna save a lot of money. That resiliency efforts are going on all over the state because things are changing. I don't really care what your opinion is on climate change. The fact is that, as Isabel said, we get a lot of rain in a short amount of time. And the infrastructure is not sized to deal with that. In the past, historically, because again, you've done some subdivision work too, the rule of thumb was you'd size things for, a 10-year storm event, like a few inches over a 24-hour period. That was what your fallback would be for design storms and sizing culverts. And we get those kind of storms, once a month anyways. So it's a 10-year storm event is the probability that storm is going to occur. 3-inch storm is going to occur once every 10 years. And that's just not how things work anymore. So DEP is considering changing their regulations to accommodate these changes, and that's just something that the town should take seriously. So we didn't really go into a lot of climate change resiliency discussion 10 years ago, but 10 years, things have changed quite a bit. So it's just something that I really think we need to focus on quite a bit. And Megan can add to that with with her discussion too, but there's a lot to it and that the town needs to take this seriously.
If the old measure was a 3-inch storm every 10 years, what was the volume of rainfall that would qualify as a 100 years?
100-year storm event, I remember 50-year storm was in the 6-inch range. I'm trying to remember, and it doesn't just, double every time. I think 100 years, probably in the 7 or 8-inch range, I think. You can look it up, but I think that's where we're at, somewhere around there.
When was the last time that we had a storm of that volume in Orono?
In Orono.
Isn't there a sign on down by Brownies Park? Isn't there a sign? It marks the 100, but does it have a date on it?
Yeah, we were like right up to it. We didn't
Yeah.
quite cross the threshold with that big storm earlier this year.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if the one that washed out the Pushaw Road,
Yeah.
those twin culverts out there, I'm wondering if that was actually exceeded that amount, but we get 100-year storm events very frequently now.
Yeah, I mean, I live on Pusha and we
Yeah.
hit the 100-year flood mark this last spring.
Okay.
I mean, I have mine marked with tape and on a
Yep.
tree and we did it last year.
Just the resiliency aspect is a really big deal for planning across the state, not just coastal communities, but in town. It's just, we see different storms now. I've got a buddy that's he works for USGS at state, and that's what he does. He studies hydrology, and he showed me data on storm events over the past 20 years, the intense storm events like you're talking about, and the graph just goes straight through the roof over the last 10 years. Those intense storms happen all the time, and normal infrastructure just isn't sized to deal with it. So you see those washouts. Just a random storm in December washes out large twin culverts, the Sunday River. Remember the access road to the hotel? Huge. I think those were 6-foot culverts, twin. They picked them up, threw them downstream like nothing. So it's a big deal.
I think both of the December storms last year would have qualified as a
Yeah.
100-year.
Yeah.
Yeah, so twice in 1 month. I don't necessarily have anything else to add, but Megan, I was hoping that you might talk a little bit more about Penobscot climate action just on a broad level, and then if anybody else has any questions or comments about the chapter or about what Orono has already been doing locally, you can feel free to ask us.
Sure. Yeah. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so we just wrapped up Penobscot Climate Action and we've been meeting. We created a committee with representatives from each municipality. And we're meeting monthly with BACs, and we're looking at EPA grants right now that we can do as a region. And we're narrowing that down. And I believe it's going to be something with transportation and increasing pedestrian crossings and bike lanes to connect Orono to Indian Island to Bangor, and kind of in Brewer and all of that. So that's something that we're working on right now. The basics were in the handout here, but I didn't know if there was something specifically, Isabel, that you wanted me to chat about.
No, not necessarily. So I would just add, it ended up coming up with 10 sort of priority goals, and these ran the gamut of transportation, water resources, food and access to food, especially local food that I'll talk about when we get to the agriculture section. Boosting the green economy, more active transportation. It was things like that. And Orono was a pretty big part of this project. And when I say Orono, I kind of mean Megan specifically. It was a pretty big part of this project with BACs. And we heard a lot from stakeholders from all of the regional towns, but a lot of conversation with residents of Orono specifically. People were very passionate about this. They really wanted to come out and talk about it. So a lot of the 10 priority goals, and I provided a link to those goals in the chapter somewhere, but there's also just a website that's penobscotclimateaction.org. And so, yeah, there's a lot of goals in there that I think will end up becoming a pretty big part of our comprehensive plan. And I've already referenced them in transportation, now in natural and water resources, and then in agriculture and forest as well. But I think that will end up being really important, and we have already heard from the public on those goals and that those are their priorities. With region-wide, but also, again, a significant number of residents of Orono coming out to talk about that as well.
There's a couple of things that I know, I was on that committee. You talked about the necessity of planting trees, particularly in areas where poorer people live, because quite often those areas don't have a lot of trees. And to get different types of trees so they can weather the different types of weather that we're getting. And the other thing we talked about was solar panels and how it would be probably good to get them at least on the town buildings and the school along with the town and the fire department to help with costs and just better. Those are two things I didn't see on the list, but I know that they were talked about. Anything else, Megan? Because I know you were in all those too.
Yeah, I would just add to that the 10 toolkits that were created, we created them so that they could be used individually by each municipality, so they could pick apart action steps within them just for the municipality. So that's something that we could add, you know, in the comprehensive plan, things specifically from those toolkits. But also you can look at them grouped together and you can utilize them as a region. So there's really a lot of levels to the toolkits and we're really excited about them, and there's a lot in there. So in each of the toolkits say how much of greenhouse gas reductions it would help with, or how resilient, how much more resilient it will make the town. So there's kind of a ranking system on them as well. But yeah, that's a lot of data, and a lot of people spent a lot of time giving their input on them. So we're really excited about them.
Megan, can you comment on other, say, regional partnerships? Obviously, there's the Bangor area stormwater group, there's the MS4 communities, there's stuff that we're looking at for development rules, you know, low impact development stuff. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, as far as like the new LID ordinance, or
Well, yeah, just, I mean, just let people know our current, the partnerships that we have. I think,
Yeah.
you know, we do stuff with Penobscot Nation, we do stuff with other communities with the stormwater group.
yeah,
Just for people's benefit.
yeah, I mean, especially in the environmental division of Public Works, we have our stormwater permit, so that is the Bangor area stormwater group, and that's 11 municipalities in the area that participate in that and meet every other month. And we work on, so there's a low impact development ordinance that is coming along through DEP and getting updated. And so we really look at that from a stormwater point of view and how it might impact Orono and other municipalities. So we work on things like that. Penobscot Climate Action, as we mentioned before, that is also the same 11, almost the same 11 communities as well. But we're looking at that in a lens of, you know, environmental and resilience issues. So that's a pretty big partnership as well. I'm trying to think what else. Actually, right now we're working with Indian Island with window dressers, the insulating window inserts. And we have a good partnership with them right now. So those are just 3 off the top of my head, but I'm sure I'm missing some.
You know of available grant funds to help deal with resiliency issues other than the BACS program?
Yeah.
Is there anything Orono's looking at?
Yeah, we're looking at any of the grants through Efficiency Maine, and some of the HVAC stuff that they just put out for municipalities. We did some resiliency grants through window dressers that we got for low income residents to get free insulating window inserts. We were looking at the state's I'm blanking on their grant program right now, but the state's climate action grants through the state. We have applied for those every single time that they're open. We were denied this last time because they were prioritizing new communities that were entering the partnership, but that's one that we always go after as well.
Has the town looked into any of the DOT stream crossing grants to upsize things like Gail had mentioned earlier?
Yeah, we looked at the infrastructure grants. The issue, what we were focusing on was the Johnny Mac Brook crossing on Route 2.
Yeah.
Because that box culvert is severely undersized. And there was an issue with it being a main DOT road and not a local road. So we were trying to narrow it down. And there isn't a lot of culverts in Orono that qualify for that program specifically, but I'm sure there are more that we can look at because we want to utilize the smart, the stream smart crossing principles, as you stated before, with the open culvert design.
Right, so just for example, wasn't the one over past the golf course near that dip near where Silver's was? And that dip, wasn't that a DOT box culvert replacement?
Yeah, they expanded it. It's a larger box, but they filled in the concrete box with stones and had it have a natural bottom.
Yep.
Yep.
I think, a couple years ago.
Yeah, those are the kinds of things you're gonna see an awful lot more of just because it's necessary.
Yeah,
And,
definitely.
yeah, I would add with the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the future, you alluded to this with the climate action, community resilience partnership. It was gonna come to me. The community resilience partnership required communities to do some work around prioritizing climate action strategies. And now, as Megan said, Orono has been applying for those grants. They tend to be a little bit smaller, but are for, resiliency planning and some upgrades as well. There's a whole list of projects on their website actually that qualify.
Yeah, we actually looked through the bipartisan infrastructure laws and some of those grants. We looked at getting a stormwater sewer pipes condition assessment done because Orono actually doesn't have one. And with some of our pipes being the original, especially down in like Tough End and areas like that, those pipes are in pretty rough shape. So that's something that we're prioritizing and trying to find funding for to get that condition assessment done so that we can start getting the correct sizes for some of these stormwater pipes and outfalls.
Any updates on the partnership? I know we've talked a little bit about it in the past. Megan, you haven't been privy to the meeting discussions, but we talked about the pilot project with Vernal Pools and working with Aram Calhoun at UMaine. And I'm just wondering if there's any updates on that program, if you're aware of what I'm speaking about.
I am briefly aware of the program, but truthfully, I haven't done anything with it. So I'm not sure what's going or what the next steps are for that.
I might be able to speak to that at least a little bit from the ordinance perspective and the regulatory perspective. So what you're referring to is back in 2008, 2010, the town worked with a professor and some graduate assistants at the university to essentially map vernal pools and specifically significant vernal pools, which end up being regulated by both the Maine DEP and then in some cases also the Army Corps of Engineers at the federal level. And it usually requires a lot of additional permitting and mitigation efforts. So, in this chapter, I included a map of where vernal pools are in Orono. You will see that there are some mapped significant vernal pools sort of in our existing growth area, so in and around the downtown. Or as a result of, I should say, the 2014 comprehensive plan, the town ended up adopting a SAMP ordinance. And I'm going to get the acronym wrong, but it's essentially a vernal pool mitigation ordinance that allowed folks who were developing within the designated growth area to instead either find land for permanent conservation outside of the growth area and get that under permanent conservation with like the Orono Land Trust or another conservation organization, or pay a impact fee to essentially impact the vernal pool, but that the town would then use to permanently conserve vernal pools elsewhere. I am not aware of that being used.
Right, so that's kind of where I'm getting at.
Yeah, so we have the ordinance in place, we have everything in place. We have not yet had a development come through and utilize that program. But the infrastructure, the regulatory infrastructure is there if somebody was interested.
Wasn't it explored with the development between Spencer and Westwood?
It wasn't in place at the time that that was proposed. After that, well, I think that's when a lot of these discussions got a lot of momentum. And then partnering with Orono Calhoun, she is the vernal pool expert in the state. She's outstanding. Came up with a really innovative program. So I think had that been in place, that the subdivision or the development might have been viable at the time, but.
What do you think are the obstacles to this being taken advantage of, like in a good way?
So that's a good question. We had a discussion in the last meeting about the perception in Orono for development and how hard things are to get through. Dennis made a couple comments about that. That's historically what the idea of Orono was. So developers seem to shy away. And part of our discussion was how do we get beyond that hurdle? So attract people to even come in town to propose developments. And if they are in the growth area and they might impact vernal pools, to understand that infill development nearest utilities and that kind of thing, maybe those kind of vernal pools, may be of less value. I was speaking with a fellow today at lunch, and I just mentioned, we've approved all the housing complexes. So the first one that went in, Orchard Trails, and it's nice. So you put all the houses on all the upland areas, and this is great. And we're preserving all these wetlands that are surrounded by buildings and pavement. So they're not really viable after a point, because when you're talking about vernal pools and the critters, they wander. They don't just stick in that vernal pool. They use it for breeding and whatever they're doing, but then they move around a lot. So preserving like tiny little pockets in the middle of a paved parking lot and housing complex is not really high value. So do you sacrifice some of those areas, I guess, as Isabel said, and try to preserve some that are farther out that have a better chance of survival? That seems to be a reasonable approach. And I mean, it's just my opinion, but when you have people like Orono Calhoun supporting that opinion carries some weight, in my opinion.
Yeah, I remember when Jeff Gordon first came back to town after being away for a bit during COVID times. He talked to me about this at length.
Yes.
Because he knows a lot about it.
Yeah, he was heavily involved. Yeah.
But yeah, I am very interested in the place to go.
Yeah. First step is try to get people interested in developing an Orono.
Any other questions for Megan? Or in general?
Megan, are there any, I'm just thinking of water quality types of issues. Does the town do any, or have you coordinated anything with like Johnny Mac Brook water quality? Because again, we've focused efforts in the past on trying to protect that as much as possible, because it does have a native brook trout population. It was always a kid fishing stream. So it has potential, but I don't know of anybody. I guess I really haven't heard of too many people using that resource. So it's just, it seems like it has potential, but I guess I'm just not aware of anybody taking advantage of that. Or do you know of any water quality studies or fish counts, anything from the Department of Inland Fish and Wildlife? I'm just curious, because that is an important resource in our town.
Yes, I agree. Definitely is important. I walked from Route 2 all the way down to where it goes into the Penobscot, and we imaged springs with a thermal camera, and there is potential for really good brook trout habitat in that area. But it gets really low because there's a huge beaver dam down towards Union Street, which is a natural beaver dam, obviously. And that's just the way, the way that it goes sometime. But there are a lot of springs, so there's a lot of capacity to hold brook trout in there. But the brook trout count is not high in that stretch. So the majority of the brook trout are actually north of Route 2. And IF&W did a shocking and a fish count. There's a lot of minnows, there's a lot of there's a lot of wildlife that use that stream as a corridor to go, from south to north. But that headwaters area is really where is most of the breeding for the trout and where they are. The thing that they were worried about there's some culverts that are undersized. There's 3 culverts that are strung together where it goes under Union Street. And the 3 of them, even with 3 culverts there, it's still undersized. However, IF&W is worried about creating that as an open face culvert, because then that would allow invasive species to come up the stream. So we're trying to figure out a plan of how we can make that stream more connected. Right now, from Route 2 to Stillwater, there's a lot of old concrete dams that are in that area. So there's not a lot of connectivity for the trout to move up and down and spawn and breed and eat. They just kind of have to stay in their one area. So we're trying to increase connectivity while also not opening up it too much down by the Penobscot to allow for smallmouth bass to go up there and start feeding away on them as well. So there's it's kind of multifaceted.
Do we do any collaboration with Angie Reed at Penobscot Water Resources?
I'm not familiar.
Oh, Angie, Dan Kuziners, he runs the environmental group over there, so I know, I think he participates in most of the regional collaboratives, but I'm trying to think.
Angie it has become a partner for us in the schools, in that she is willing to bring students into research and data gathering, and has been really nimble in identifying and securing funding in a way that removes that as a barrier to, projects that are pretty substantial. She is, and one of the grants that funds her work is the Penobscot Restoration Grant that came as a result of the mill in Bucksport. And we recently wrote a letter of support for her for submission for a Keep America Beautiful grant that is going to fund projects on a wide spectrum that are all connected to the well-being of this region's ecosystem as it pertains to water. I know that one of the projects that she is working on currently is about thermo-imaging of water in this region to identify where the cold pockets are.
That's what
And
she just mentioned.
yeah, and so I'm wondering, it's surprising that these things are not connected in some way, because I think Angie's funding for that was specifically around the I don't know what kind of equipment it is that does that thermal imaging from the sky. I don't know if it's a kind of drone or something else, but she has been such an enthusiastic partner and is so great at identifying where partnerships should be happening, and then creating that conduit. And then, from a school perspective, being willing to invite students into the conversation. And, one of the other projects she's done has been about measuring the mercury levels in the region via dragonfly larvae. That's
What?
another project that she's.
I'm sorry, what is her last name?
Angie Reed, Reed.
Okay. I studied
Yeah,
mercury and dragonflies for my master's at UMaine. So I definitely need to link up with her.
Yeah, you got to meet. But I just think that she would be I mean, it sounds like we're duplicating work, honestly. And so I wonder if that would be a place to connect and kind of bring her into the conversation and find out where our work can dovetail.
One thing again, Megan is an avid fisherman. I like to fish quite a bit too, but don't really have a lot of mention in our chapters about the fisheries here, but Megan, I think we're becoming a destination because there's pike in Pushaw, and obviously smallmouth bass fishing is pretty good. And, again, if there was a small stream, Johnny Mac Brook, that supports a brook trout population for kids to fish in, it seems like we might be able to expand on that. And I mean, if we use recreation, if we're trying to bring people into town, whether it's the Caribou Bog or the land trust trails or anything like that, but I'm just thinking if we can add this to our list of attractions, it might be worthwhile. And you fish more than I do nowadays, Megan. Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, first, it sounds like you got to get your priorities straight and fish a little more, Phil.
I agree with you.
No, I mean, I agree. I think that the Stillwater section of the river in and of itself is world renowned for smallmouth bass fishing. It's a little bit slower than the main stem, and there are multiple people that come up from Acadia region with their families to fish that area. So, people already do travel here to fish. So that's definitely a valid point. As far as trout and Johnny Mac, the numbers that are there, in my opinion, are not sustainable to be fished at all at this point. Just because there's so few of them. But smallmouth bass on the river, absolutely. You get striper that come up to that area, especially right behind the Orono Dam there. And a lot of people go there to fish. So that's definitely something to think about. And pike and Pushaw. Those aren't going anywhere, unfortunately, for the people who like to fish for other stuff. They're not going anywhere. And they're becoming quite large, and people are coming from even southern Maine just to fish for pike and Pushaw Stream.
The problem in Orono at Pushaw, they have 5 parking spaces for vehicles with boat trailers. So when I leave my house, it can be at Pushaw in about 20 minutes. I don't get to park there.
Right.
Because everybody from out of town is already parked there.
We talked about that. I don't know if Megan Mazzella got into it last time with you all specifically, but when I had my conversation with her, that was one of the main things that she wanted to point out, is that unless you're getting there at 6 a.m., you are not getting a spot at Pushaw specifically.
Well, I took a spot, but it cost me $35 in a ticket when I got off my truck.
Yeah. But yeah, to your point, I can add in some additional data and information on the fisheries.
We do have a lot of resources in town, and why not?
Yeah.
That's another push for fixing that railroad trestle, so we could have a good fishing place right along the sides of the bridge.
That would be nice. That would be nice.
Hey, this is Eric.
There's got to be pike in that river. Because they're in Pushaw Stream, and Pushaw Stream goes to the river.
Yeah.
I don't hear if people they've got to be there.
That's what I figured too.
I hear something from Eric.
I think so. Eric, was that you?
Yeah, I have my video turned off just because the internet's bad. Is my audio okay?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So I wonder if all this discussion of the Penobscot and the Stillwater, and there's some reference that it's the Stillwater branch of the Penobscot in the paperwork in the agenda packet, but I don't think Orono has an official acknowledgement of the renaming of the Stillwater from its original Penobscot name. And perhaps that's something that should be included in our discussions and maybe even what the town officially acknowledges somewhere in a public way.
Good point.
The University of Maine has a site sort of that sort of discusses this, but even that it's from an artist. It's not something that the university is officially seems to be announcing. It's a statement that an artist created. But it does seem like an important part of the history of Marsh Island and a huge amount of the area that is within Orono.
I know the council has been interested in pursuing, maybe in collaboration with the Historical Society, some signage around town similar to something the university did. Although, that's very much still a conceptual sort of brainstorming stage. But I think having historical resources around town like that could be really beneficial, talking about sort of the Stillwater River in addition to all sorts of other parts of town in a similar way. That should be kept in mind.
We talked a little bit about that in the historic and archaeological resources chapter. That was one of the sort of potential opportunities for the town to pursue as well. To Eric's point, a lot of municipalities are doing like formal land acknowledgements and formal in their comprehensive plans, formal reckoning with name changes and things like that. It might be a good opportunity as we're getting closer to sort of discussing organization of the final document, if things like that are things that you would like to include within this. And I think that would go along with Eric's comment as well.
Other questions for Megan? She's here. Will we have her? Can't think of anything else at the moment.
Okay, well, thank you, Megan, for attending, answering our questions. Sure, we'll reach back out to you.
Oh, certainly. Yeah, please reach out if there are any questions at all. And I appreciate you guys' time working on this and dedicating a whole thing for the environment and talking about it. So I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Megan.
guys.
So moving on to agriculture and forestry, I recognize that this is also sort of a natural resource. The state separates this out for their purposes of their chapters, so I did the same thing in our plan. I believe it was sort of all in one big long chapter in your 2014 plan, and I thought it just had a sort of natural separation. So that's what I did here. So in terms of issues and opportunities, a lot of the documented issues here are coming specifically from the Maine Farmland Trust, which has a whole municipal policy and advocacy arm, and they're doing a lot of work with trying to get municipalities across the state to be more farm friendly. So what they have documented is that in general, farming alone is no longer an economically viable means of keeping the farm going. They are recommending that towns recognize that these enterprises are often hybrids of several different land uses. So agriculture, retail, farm-to-table restaurants, event spaces or barns for weddings, things like that. To that end, regulations, especially in more rural districts, should allow farm businesses the increased flexibility to adapt to rapidly changing markets. Unfortunately, our ordinances sort of do the opposite. So they end up requiring additional restrictions on farming uses. They don't recognize sort of amalgamations of several different uses as one. You would have to get those all permitted separately. And they require increased setback requirements and the need for off-street parking for even like seasonal uses at farms. So if you're doing like pick your own strawberries or pick your own apples, they're required, our ordinances would currently require off-street parking for that, which obviously isn't super farm friendly and doesn't leave a lot of flexibility for, trying to innovate. Then with regards to timber harvesting and forestry management, so just for a little bit of background, I guess, the town's land use ordinance is actually a combination of, in other towns, what would be traditionally separate ordinances. So land use, site plan, subdivision review, shoreland zoning, floodplain management. In Orono, all of these regulations are just considered under one land use ordinance and are subject to all of the same definitions. I think when these ordinances were combined, it doesn't appear that consideration was given to the varying impact levels between, for example, timber harvesting for commercial purposes, and then general forestry management, which is more undertaken for the health of the forest, even though the selling of harvested wood might end up being sort of an ancillary benefit of that. So we treat those as kind of the same thing, even though the impacts obviously are much different. So general forestry management, you're doing that through the health of the forest, you're getting a forest management plan, and then timber harvesting, we regulate much differently. It's heavily regulated in the shoreland areas, but in order to protect waterways and from other environmental concerns, but it's almost not regulated at all in the other areas of town, while forest management isn't regulated at all in the town's underlying zoning ordinances. So it's quite confusing sort of what people can actually do. We have a performance standards for timber harvesting that seem to apply more forest management. It's a little bit odd. So the performance standards for timber harvesting, because that's a more impactful use, should probably recognize that that's the more impactful of the two, and allow the standards for forestry management to be at least slightly scaled back. And then obviously there's some issues with the definitions of these two uses that could be further clarified. I think this was just sort of something that was missed when all of these things were combined, and now it's causing some unclear regulation everywhere. And then going back to Penobscot Climate Action, but also to the Maine Farmland Trust Farm Friendly Guide. Small scale agriculture is really, sometimes called urban agriculture, is really seen as a pretty high priority goal of both the Maine Farmland Trust, but also our regional climate action plan in order to strengthen our regional and local food resilience. So one of the main ways that Orono could accomplish this goal is by expanding access to urban farming opportunities, including community gardens. So for example, in the village commercial and the high density residential zoning districts, agriculture of any size, including small scale agriculture and associated structures like farm stands, would not be allowed at all. Meanwhile, you know, in the other districts, again, it's fairly difficult to get started with that because of the regulations that are in place. So you're not going to be doing it at this sort of small scale level. The other thing that the town could potentially do is identify municipal properties that could be converted into community garden spaces, or add community garden spaces at like existing parks or existing municipal buildings. The other thing that Maine Farmland Trust suggests is that for projects that propose housing, suggesting or incentivizing the incorporation of community garden spaces for future residents as part of the planning board's review of the site design. So right now, sometimes myself acting on behalf of the planning board will end up providing advisory comments to applicants to sort of make the project better, or to add additional things that might not be specifically outlined in our ordinances. And that could be a good opportunity to sort of suggest gently that folks incorporate community garden space in their residential projects. And that is what I wanted to highlight, at least. I know that that's not small potatoes, but I did want to just highlight those items specifically from the Maine Farmland Trust and our regional plans.
Isabel, can you go back to the previous slide with the bullets? Thanks.
Yep.
I have a lot of, I'm really passionate about urban gardening and urban farming, so my excitement might get the better of me as I try to like explain what I think and feel about this. But I like the suggestions here, but I'd like almost like more. So I drive around and I look at all this green space, these people who mow lines into their lawn, and we're growing monoculture grass, and it makes me feel things. I wonder if there's a way to incentivize or almost help people, maybe with the extension office or existing resources in town. Maine Farmland Trust is a great one too. They're not in town. But to kind of expand individuals' options for that as well, right? So like, you know, as I started homesteading, I'm kind of butting up against a few things like challenges putting in things like raised beds, because I don't have the ability to dig into the soil where I live because I'm on like ledge, right? Or like if I wanted to keep chickens, we don't define what a chicken is. It'd be great if we did define what a chicken is, but broaden it, right? So like, how much land would you need to have a small duck pond and have 6 ducks, right? Quail are completely quiet and they like to be in little hutches because they're delicious and everything thinks they're delicious, and so they hide. They don't want to be free range, right? So they're quiet, they're like a good neighborly thing, right? Like maybe expanding some of the types of things that we can do in medium or maybe even high density residential that could help people, you know, the idea of a victory garden, does anybody know what that is? Great. The idea of a victory garden, but almost like scaled back, right? Cause you know, feeding your entire family on a half an acre is pretty hard. But what if you could supplement, right? Things like that. So I wonder kind of what some of the opportunities are, not just for us as a community, but for as a municipal community, but also for, you know, helping landowners make some of those choices on their own. And I don't know, I've thought a lot about it, but I don't have any of the answers because it seems like a pretty big question. So outside of maybe changing some of the way we look at these things, right? Like nobody wants their neighbor to have a rooster waking them up at 4 a.m. But again, something like quail might be a lot easier to keep in, you know, a neighbory district.
We spent an awful lot of time the last go around, last comp plan, talking about food hubs, and John Jemison was on the committee. Very passionate. It was very interesting discussions we had, but he's an advocate. I mean, we have a very successful farmers market. We get a lot of people that enjoy fresh produce.
But those farms aren't in Orono.
No, you're right, but again, how, part of that thought, to expand on what you were saying, is how do we incentivize maybe local production, then we can have our own.
Right, like one
farmers
of the things that I like as a model, and this is so unique to the geography of the place, but Monhegan Island has the Monhegan Island Farm. If anybody's ever been there, it's really interesting and really cool. They're obviously an island like way off the coast in the middle of nowhere, very remote. And so the farm, the Monhegan Island Farm, is little tiny plots in multiple landowners' yards. I don't know what their like business model looks like, but that's one of the ways they feed people in town. And, you know, we have a small scale version of that right down the road here, but I'd love to see more of that, right? And find some resources and some ways to get people to do that, because, you know, I think it's good for people, right? Like I invite kids into my yard. I'm like, okay, guys, I just pulled these weird vegetables out of the ground. Let's talk about it, right? Or like I picked gooseberries at my parents' farm in Dover. Come over and I'll feed your kids gooseberries, right? Like they're illegal in Maine, but they were existing. But, you know, things like that, like what could we do? It would be an educational component. I don't know if there's a way to work with the schools. I don't even really know. I mean, there is a school garden. My daughter works on it. You know, things like that. Like there's gotta be more.
There probably shouldn't be too many barriers to.
Right,
those
there's a lot
kinds
of barriers.
Yeah.
I
that's
looked
something
into
we-
putting a farm stand up for my like crazy neighborhood farm and I was like, oh God, I don't know if I can do this here. Right, like something like that shouldn't be a barrier, right? Like I should just be able to say like, hey guys, I got too many potatoes, they're on my farm stand. Like, go check
What's
them
the
out.
barrier to the farm stand?
You have to have like some frontage and enough like egress so that people can pull off to the side, and I'm on like a little like cul-de-sac-y kind of neighborhood, so like how much space do I really need? Like there's not a lot of traffic, there's not like a fight to get around in my neighborhood, you know? So it would be nice if some of the neighborhoods like that didn't need to have so much space associated with a farm stand.
So there's setback requirements, there's the requirement for at least one off-street little parking parking spot. Which even in like farming areas is kind of a lot to ask folks.
Well, I mean, yard sales, they get away with everything. People are crazy. Those things, but then,
When is that date from? Like, when was the era that felt like a priority?
That's a great question.
Will you give me 1 second?
I'll tell you in a minute.
We need to put one right on that little piece of property next to the university, what they call it, Warrenfield, make it open to everyone.
All right.
good question.
All right,
Yeah,
so
that's a good question.
this was adopted in the part about agriculture roadside stands for the sale of agricultural products was originally adopted in 2000 with a fairly substantial update in 2017 that made things more difficult, and that's my opinion.
Let's run that back.
Yeah, I mean, do people have any objection to that kind of thing? Seems like I remember when they allowed chickens. Eric lives across the street from me. He's got chickens. We've got 1 chicken left after having 6, but yeah, all of the neighbors around us, a lot of chickens, so it was nice.
I want quail.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
my-
that kind of thing. If it's low impact,
And that's the
Yeah.
thing, it's like guinea fowl are loud, right?
Yeah.
But like I would love to explore what kinds of poultry would be, right, like if you have some ducks with clipped wings, I don't know how I feel about that, but whatever, right? Like what livestock could you have in what places that might be, right, like you can't put a pig on a half acre, but maybe you could put a pig on an acre, right? And that's not allowed. I think, what is it, that you need 5 acres and then there's a whole bunch of other stuff, right? Like you could put a pig on an acre, right? I can't have a pig, but somebody down the road with an acre might be able to have one, right? And there's already things in the ordinance about, having a way to deal with waste that is nice to your neighbors, right? And so as long as people are following rules, I would love to see, especially a community like Orono that cares about local food. I'd like to see more local food in Orono.
good topic for public meetings. To bring up, 'cause
Yeah.
I've heard similar comments before. I mean, John had some very strong opinions about trying to develop a food hub in Orono.
Yeah.
I don't think we got really any progress on that particular item, but still a good thing to follow up on.
And to your point, yeah, the farmer's market is super popular, and only
The flower.
the flower farm is from,
Yeah.
is in Orono.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and there's the other flower farm that also is there from Bangor, and there's like, I think she's the only one from Bangor, maybe. No, the coffee, no, they're from Winterport, right? So like the amount of food that comes out of this area, Orono, BZ, Old Town, right, is pretty slim. And I feel like we could have more, especially if we got creative and encouraged it in the right ways. And I'm sure, the extension would love to get involved with, promoting that in Orono. It would be great for the university as well.
The most of those people that are at the farmers market, they come from small towns, outlying areas.
Some of them, the meat guys from Dover, I think there's one from like maybe Albion.
But I guess what I'm thinking
Yeah.
is they're coming from places where land is less expensive and taxes aren't so bad.
Yeah, but there is the micro flower farm that does manage to do it just up the road here, right? And so there are things that you can do, like I grow mushrooms, right? Like 3 different types of mushrooms in Orono on a half an acre. And I have to get creative, and I've got like my little mushroom woodlot all parceled out, but you could grow something like a shiitake farm could actually work in Orono on a small amount of land. Right, like high value, low density space requirements, things like mushrooms and flowers and, eggs. A consortium of people who have 6 chickens each. 6 chickens is more than enough eggs for a small family. You get a consortium of people, right? Like there are creative ways that we could get to that, I think.
I think, to your point and what Dennis mentioned, the taxes, we have to be creative. The last go around, we tried to open up, because we discussed this with the housing chapter when we were talking about trying to allow more opportunities for houses in town, specifically the historic district, to allow bed and breakfast, just so that people can have other ways to support their residences. And, you know, your comments about how farming is limited to the F&A restrictions, we shouldn't be doing that. If, you know, we need to find creative ways that are more flexible, that allow people, different businesses to come to town. You know, like you said, multi-use, as long as it's compatible with the F&A zone, but yeah, we just need to start thinking a little differently than standard zoning requirements, so.
Specifically in the F&A, just since you brought this up, I think I don't have a specific solution, but I would encourage people as we're beginning to think about this and going into public engagement to think about like rural function and what that looks like versus just rural character, because you know, rural character means something different to everybody, but rural function is the actual ability to utilize the land for farming and you know, other agricultural endeavors or what have you. And so I think sort of backpedaling some restrictions in those areas to protect that rural function
Right.
is really important.
So we did talk about clustering provisions in the F&A and, you know, trying to preserve open space out there, but we really didn't get into any farming issues that I recall 10 years ago. So that'd be an interesting discussion.
I guess I just picture my times of being up there at the farmer's market, which I enjoy, the you know, nice fresh produce, but they're people who are living on a modest income. And they usually have their homes where they're raising their crops and everything, and I'm just not sure they could survive what it costs to live in Orono.
That's probably, I mean, if that's your exclusive use of your space, probably not, right? I think, you know, to the point of what was in the packet, I think you need to see multi-use, right? And we even have multi-use farms. You mentioned the two, right? The home and the flowers, and then there's the Bass Rouge, which does native species that she sells in little pots at the farmer's market. There are two in Orono. And there, it's also a forge, right? So they have multi-use in that same space. And I think that's how you see that kind of come, like my friend in Bradford just had to let her, there was some regulatory issues, and then she lives in Bradford, but she had a farm, a daycare, and a home, and her husband's electrical business all out of one space, right? Like that's pretty standard, especially as you get in these lesser regulated towns where there aren't a lot of ordinances. You see multi-use like that, 4 uses in one property. I think she has like 40 acres maybe, but still.
Yeah, how are we gonna get people to
Right.
move here and afford our taxes?
Right,
I think we need to be more flexible.
yeah. Supplement some of that income with creative.
I was wondering if we talk about this, so if somebody does this and wants to set up a farm stand, no matter how reasonable they sell the vegetables, does that require a home occupation permit?
It would currently, yeah.
Yeah, so now they gotta go through, they gotta go see him and the rest of his cohorts to get a.
Sure, but if we change it, then we don't have to do that. Right,
I'm just thinking about like the impact of that on how it feels to be in a community, right? And you know, and I think about, you know, my kids, every time we pass a lemonade stand, they want to stop. And it really is, it's more about the social element than the commercial element, that idea of they're putting themselves out there, like they are standing there open to the world in the hopes that they will connect, right? And, you know, maybe that connection will turn into like a few dollars in their pocket, but you know, just that being in the age when kids are spending so much time in their rooms on devices, like that feeling more important than ever. And knowing that there are adult versions of that too, right? You know, being able, like knowing where the places are in your community where you can find human connection, even if that human connection is a cooler with eggs in it, that you put, you know, a $5 bill in the, you know, the money slot, and you know, get to know that you are looped into a system that is intimate in a way that it never is if you're, you know, getting your eggs from Hannaford.
right, and like this is the time of year for this joke that goes around the internet, but they say this is the time of year to lock your cars because your neighbors are gonna slip, you know, unsuspecting like zucchini into your car. And you know, I grew up in Milo and that was a problem, right? Like we would just, cause we had so many, I don't know why my parents planted this many zucchinis, but we would have it coming out our ears. So every time we saw somebody, we'd hand them a zucchini, you know, "Oh, nice to see you, here's a zucchini." And I don't get that as much here. Like I'm the only person in my neighborhood who's growing too many zucchinis. I'm not growing.
Zucchinis for everybody.
Yes.
I was gonna say,
Right?
you're gonna bring
Zucchinis
him to
and
the meeting?
chicken. Maybe. I got a lot of rat tail radishes right now. That's what I've got a lot of.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think in general, I have started to brainstorm some solutions from existing regional plans and Maine Farmland Trust. I think hearing more from the public about sort of like I don't fully understand why this was regulated the way it was. I'm assuming it was for a reason though, like maybe people were against this. So I think that's what we're going to have to sort of figure out. But it also does seem like, based on the popularity of the farmer's market, that local food is really important to Orono. So putting our money where our mouth is in terms of regulation would be beneficial, I think.
I think the VP of, or the dean of the extension school, I'm pretty sure she lives in Orono, right? Hannah lives in Orono? Yeah. I mean, that's a resource that, you know, somebody who has a lot of experience, a PhD in farm leadership or agricultural leadership or something like that, lives in Orono, right? And she would love, she loves to talk about how to get agriculture in every little corner she can get agriculture in. And I have to assume there are some really good solutions.
Other comments?
We do need to talk about schedule. So what I want to know is I recognize that throughout this process, and specifically going back to our housing conversation, there was a request for some additional data. You had mentioned adding stuff about fisheries. I've been taking notes throughout this process. So we are essentially done with our existing conditions, but I will follow up with you with your additional data requests in the packet for our upcoming meeting. We just probably won't have a whole discussion about it since we've already discussed all of these chapters. But in terms of next steps, what I do need from you is just to make sure that we're on the same page about our upcoming schedule. Let me, I'll share it on my screen. So I included a draft in our packet. We had talked about our schedule at our public kickoff meeting, and we had only confirmed dates through essentially this meeting. So I want to make sure we're on the same page at least through the fall so that I can start working with communications to actually publicize these events. And the purpose of these events is actually going to be, you know, rather than us having a discussion that's a little bit not geared towards the public, these will be specific events where the public will be invited and they'll be more geared towards fun, interesting, able to give feedback. So I have a workshop, another sort of workshop meeting like this that I thought we could do on September 4th to go through both those edits and additional data requests that I mentioned, but also to essentially get our project website and our draft online survey ready, with the hope that we could launch a project website pretty soon after that meeting in early September that would include an online survey. And then I have a bunch of open house events, topic area community engagement events, and a variety of other events essentially planned out through March. I wanted to make sure that there weren't any specific conflicts that you're aware of. I did check like the school's calendar that was published just to make sure that there wasn't conflict with anything going on. And there wasn't that I could see on the public calendar. I have booked these events through our council chambers calendar as well, our internal calendar, so there weren't room conflicts per se. But I wanted to make sure there weren't conflicts with you all if there was something that you're particularly passionate about.
Can you describe the workshops a little more, what you hope to get out of them?
Yes, so for the community open house, which I have as sort of our initial workshop, essentially what I would like to do with that one is just introduce the topic of comprehensive planning, what it is, why it's important, and then just start to get some very initial feedback about what people love and want to keep, what people would want to change, and then any additional feedback that they have. And I've planned to do one of these on a weeknight and one of these on the weekend, just to get as many people as possible, but they'll be the same program. So essentially, I would envision giving some sort of brief presentation about comprehensive plans, why they're important, go through at least the high points of the data that we've gathered so far, and then again, start to get some initial feedback. From that initial feedback, I'm hoping to try to understand what are sort of our top 4 pinch points or top 4 areas of interest for the community. And then we have engagement events specific to those topic areas in November and December. And my hope there is that we would do a deep dive on data, get some further feedback, and then do some sort of facilitated activity so that we can start to understand what people's goals are and get some initial ideas for policy making. Future land use plan is a little bit self-explanatory, but we have to have a future land use plan in our comprehensive plan document. That's really what underscores all of our future zoning amendments and is sort of what the zoning map is based on. So those events are, I envision them, again, a brief conversation about what this is and why it's important, and then a facilitated conversation about what is currently missing from the community based on everything that we had heard previously and where people might want to see those things in the future so that we can use that to develop the future land use plan. And then I have a visit to school. In other towns, I had developed a sort of curriculum that's sort of loosely based on the adult version of the future land use plan. It works the best with 4th and 5th graders, I think, because they're old enough to understand, but young enough to just give any feedback that they're thinking of. So I end up going to the schools and doing a facilitated conversation and then a mapping activity with them.
Do a university similarly?
It wasn't specifically in my scope, but if that's something that the committee would be interested in, I can talk about adding something like that.
I mean, we can set it up if it's something that people want to do.
Yeah, we haven't really had great luck engaging the university community, so.
Get them there.
Yeah, so talking to students I think would be interesting.
That's important.
I mean, I would just invite the graduate student government, the undergraduate student government to come, and we could easily get at least 20.
Cool, yeah, that would be awesome.
That's a good,
Maybe some resident assistants, some other folks like that.
Yeah.
Leaders.
great idea.
Also if we stay on this first Wednesday of the month schedule, it's not a conflict, but it could be difficult for some of us that the day after election day, November 6th.
Yep.
There's gonna be a significant amount of people involved in it.
So I had sort of anticipated that after we work together to get the materials ready for the open house events, that we would sort of not meet as this group, but instead focus your attention on the community engagement events. So save an additional meeting at least, where I'll be giving you 2 a month for 3 months after that.
We talk about September 4th, again, the workshop, that's this group too. It's the main stormwater conference, so actually it's supposed to be down in Portland.
Oh, okay.
2 days or that evening. Stay down there, talk about stormwater. Anybody, it's a really good time, I'm just telling you.
Oh, sounds like it.
Yeah. Yes.
We can watch draw.
What's that? Huh? So I have a unplugged thing. Okay,
It's like a rocks Christmas. Any other concerns or issues with sort of phase 2 and what's happening next or these dates? Okay.
Have these dates been juxtaposed with Jewish holidays?
No, that is the one that I haven't looked at.
Yeah, probably in December, we're probably looking at Hanukkah, aren't we?
Yeah,
It's the only holiday we do.
so I can make sure I do that before confirming and then send an email. And then in terms of phase two, the committee's role is going to start, I mean, it's been important, but it's going to be really important just in terms of making sure that I'm on the right track. I can bring in my professional recommendations all day long, but if, you guys know Orono best, I want you to tell me if you think, I think we should do this event a little bit more like this, or you're not gonna get people to that event if you present it that way. So we'll talk a lot more about that at our September and October workshops, our meetings of this group. But it'll become important for me to get some feedback just to make sure that I'm doing things in a way that adequately represents what you're hoping to get out of folks.
Can attend remotely.
September 4th.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tavern down
Yeah, exactly. Well.
That's all from me.
Wow, we might get out early this evening. Any other thoughts? I know we had good discussion last time. I don't know how the remote facilitation was. Tried to make it work last week, but hopefully we'll avoid that in the future. Jeff wasn't able to attend, so I was gonna lean on him and then he couldn't go. So Isabel and I talked about it, and so I chaired remotely, but I hope that was acceptable. It worked for folks, but those should be few and far between. I think if Jeff can be in person on the 4th, that would help.
I just looked, Isabel, and October 2nd is the only day that's in conflict. That is first out of Rosh Hashanah.
I can try to amend that week if needed. Like we could even meet on a different day if that would work for folks, but.
Yeah. Be in New York that day. Can't remember. Find a different day for that.
Okay. Yeah.
Anything else? Wow. Out early. Enjoy.